Okay, let's talk about fraudulent schemes. It's a phrase that sounds pretty heavy, and honestly, it is. But what does it actually mean under Arizona law? In this explainer, we're going to break down the statute ARS 13-2310. We'll cut right through all the complicated legal language so you can get a clear picture of what this charge is all about. All right, before we dive in, we have to get the really important legal stuff out of the way. Just so we're all clear, this is for educational purposes. It is absolutely not a substitute for real legal advice. If you are facing any kind of criminal charge, your first move should always be to talk with an experienced Arizona defense lawyer. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to define what a fraudulent scheme even is. Then we'll get into the 5 things the state must prove. After that, we'll look at some real-world examples, talk about the state's timeline for filing charges, and then get into the very serious penalties. Sound good? Let's jump right in. Okay, Section 1. Let's start right at the beginning. What exactly qualifies as a fraudulent scheme in the eyes of the law here in Arizona? Let's look at the official definition. So here it is, straight from the statute. The law says it's about knowingly getting some kind of benefit by using a plan or a trick. The keywords to hang on to there are knowingly and benefit. This isn't about an honest business mistake or a deal that just went south. We're talking about intentional deception to get ahead. Now, for the state to actually convict someone of this, they can't just throw the charge out there and see what happens. They have a really high bar to clear. Think of it like a 5-point checklist, and they have to prove every single one beyond a reasonable doubt. If they miss even one, the whole case can fall apart. So here's that checklist. First, they've got to show you acted knowingly. Second, that there was some kind of false conduct, lies, bogus promises, that sort of thing. Third, that it was all part of a scheme, a thought-out plan. Fourth, that the intent was specifically to mislead somebody. And last, that you actually got a benefit from it. Miss any one of these, and the case just doesn't hold up. Let's zoom in on that word knowingly, because this is so important. It just means you were aware of what you were doing. It does not mean you had to know that what you were doing was against the law. So the old, I didn't know that was illegal defense, it just won't fly here. The whole focus is on whether you were aware of your actions themselves. And benefit? You might think that just means cash, but nope. The law defines this really broadly. It could be money, sure, but it could also be property, services, or even something you can't touch, like getting a contract you shouldn't have. This wide-open definition is why the law can cover so many different situations. Now, here's a twist that catches a lot of people by surprise. The prosecutor does not have to prove that the victim actually fell for the scam. It doesn't even matter if they lost money. The crime is in the act of creating and carrying out the fraudulent plan itself. That's all it takes. Okay, so that's all the legal theory. But what does this stuff actually look like in the real world? Let's walk through a couple of common examples to make it all a little more concrete. First up, the classic Ponzi scheme. I mean, this is pretty much the poster child for Arizona's fraudulent schemes law. You can see how perfectly this fits our 5-point checklist, right? The scheme is the whole structure designed to fool investors. The false conduct is the promise of these guaranteed amazing returns. And the benefit? Well, that's the money that comes pouring in from new investors. It checks every single box. Another really common area where this law comes into play is real estate or mortgage fraud. This shows you just how flexible this charge can be. Again, let's run it through the test. This scheme is the deception baked into the property deal. The false conduct could be something like lying about your income on a loan application. And the benefit is pretty clear. It's the loan or the sale money you get because of that false information. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the clock. There's a deadline for prosecutors to bring these kinds of charges. It's called the statute of limitations. And for fraudulent schemes, it is a long, long time. 7 years. That's the magic number. The state has a full 7 years from when the offense allegedly happened to file charges. That is a massive window, and it means that something from way back in your past can absolutely still come up today. So what happens if there's a conviction? Let's be really clear here, we are not talking about a slap on the wrist. The penalties for fraudulent schemes are some of the most severe in the entire state of Arizona. Fraudulent schemes is always a Class 2 felony, which is a big deal. As you can see, that carries a potential prison sentence of anywhere from 3 to 12.5 years. Now, probation for up to 7 years might be on the table, but that all depends on the specific facts of the case and a person's criminal history. But, and this is a huge but, If the benefit involved is valued at $100,000 or more, the game completely changes. If convicted, prison is mandatory, period. No probation, no early release, no pardon. The sentence the judge gives is the sentence that gets served, day for day. It is an absolute game changer.
All right, let's wrap this all up by quickly hitting on a couple of common questions that always seem to come up with this charge.
First, people always ask, how is this any different from regular theft? And the key word, the real difference maker, is deception. See, theft is usually just about taking something without permission. Fraudulent schemes is about tricking someone into giving you something through a whole plan built on lies.
The law talks about not just telling lies, but also something called material omissions. So what in the world does that mean? Okay, so a material omission is basically when you purposely leave out a super important piece of information that a normal person would need to make a good decision. So it's not just about staying quiet, it's about actively hiding a critical fact you know they should have. And that act of hiding becomes its own form of deception.
So we've seen it all laid out. This is a serious Class 2 felony with a very long reach and consequences that can alter your life, especially when that $100,000 threshold is crossed. Understanding the charge is the first crucial step, but this all leads to one final provocative question. Knowing the true gravity of this situation, what is the single most important next step anyone in this position can take?